Hello, and welcome to the Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District's Aquatic Invasive Species Program Year-End Presentation. I am Garrett Miller, the Aquatic Invasive Species Program Coordinator, and today we'll be going over some of the highlights from the AIS program in 2023. We'll begin today's presentation by taking a look at the 2023 Aquatic Invasive Species Program Year-End Summary. This report can be found on the district's website and included in the December 20th board packet. In this report, there'll be a lot more information broken out by lakes, but for today's purposes, we'll be taking a look at some of the general highlights and then adding some commentary where necessary. To begin, we'll start with curly-leaf pondweed management. Some brief background before we dive in. The Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District manages curly-leaf because of its ability to impact water quality negatively. It can do this because it has an unusual growth cycle compared to our native species where it grows early in the season underneath the ice and dies off midsummer, releasing a bunch of available nutrients like phosphorus that can fuel noxious algae blooms. This is a big reason why the district manages this species. Curly-leaf pondweed is monitored and surveyed on many of the district's water bodies, and in 2023, these lakes included Forest, Bone, Comfort, Shields, Moody, Little Comfort, and Keewatin lakes. Of these lakes, only Forest and Shields lakes were identified as having enough curly-leaf pondweed to justify a treatment. In Shields Lake, 3.07 acres were identified for treatment, and on Forest Lake, 61.55 acres were identified there. In 2023, the district decided to use dicot as its herbicide of choice over Aquathol K. This was due to Aquathol K's price being significantly higher compared to several years ago, making it slightly cost prohibitive. However, results of the dicot seem to be on par, if not performing just as well in many cases. This year on Shields Lake, we performed just over a 3-acre treatment and had almost complete lake-wide control with only 1 to 2 areas of light growth remaining in the entire lake. On Forest Lake, we treated just over 61 acres across 8 different locations around the lake and had some of the best control we have seen on Forest Lake to date. Moving on, Eurasian water milfoil management. Some brief background. Since 2017, the district has not conducted any herbicide treatments for Eurasian water milfoil control, and instead left such activities to the local lake associations to coordinate. This was done for several reasons. Among them was the advice from experts and available literature suggesting that EWM is largely a recreational nuisance and not an impairment to water quality, and addressing AIS for water quality is a top priority of the district's 10-year watershed management plan. Additionally, in many cases, EWM has also been shown to have minimal impact on native plant species. Rarely is its stem density high enough to crowd out native plants, and in certain cases where it does, that's when the district would potentially step in, as it would be having an ecological impact on that area. So while the district no longer conducts EWM treatments, it still coordinates and funds delineation and assessment surveys and offers these to the local lake associations for their treatments. The district monitors EWM on many of its lakes. However, it only contracts professional surveys for Bone, Forest, and Comfort lakes annually. On Bone Lake in 2023, only light densities of EWM were found during the summer, and no treatment was recommended to the lake association. This is pretty typical of Bone Lake, and it is rare to see EWM in high enough densities to warrant treatment on that lake. In Forest Lake, the first delineation occurred in mid-June, and only a few locations of light growth were found at that time. The Lake Association was recommended not to treat. A follow-up delineation occurred in early August, at which time 8.41 acres were marked for treatment. The Forest Lake Association did move forward and conduct a EWM treatment using Procellacor. On Comfort Lake, and some background, in 2022, the Comfort Lakes Association conducted a whole lake fluoridone treatment. In 2023, there were only 4 locations of EWM growth found in June, a substantial decrease from previous years at a similar time. A follow-up delineation on August 8th found that EWM had expanded ever so slightly from the June survey, and to protect the investment, the Comfort Lake Association had put in with their fluoridone treatment, they decided to treat the 2.77 acres using Procelacor as well. Procelacor seems to be a popular EWM herbicide with our lake associations, as its manufacturer guarantees 3 years of control using it. As mentioned on the previous slide, both lake associations conducted Procelacor treatments for their respective EWM populations. Unfortunately, we do not have assessment surveys to take a look at how these treatments performed. This is partially due to EWM coming in later into the season. Typically, EWM is treated sometime in maybe July. Both these treatments, however, occurred in either mid-August or early September, which falls outside of our regularly scheduled surveys and therefore was not captured in the last survey of the season. However, given how targeted and small these treatments were, and the fact that they were both using Procelacor, we were pretty confident that both treatments captured and took care of all the EWM that was delineated in these surveys. Moving topics again, Forest Lake flowering rush. So a general overview of the district's management history starts with flowering rush has been in Forest Lake probably as early as 1998. And the district started managing the population in 2014. At that time, there was about 7.8 acres of flowering rush in the lake total if you were to clump it all together and get an acreage size. The district's management history with flowering rush is definitely that of adaptive management, trying things, testing things out, seeing what is working and what isn't, and implementing those changes in the following year. Forest Lake's flowering rush is unique in that it is currently the only known population in the state to have viable seeds. So not only does it spread by the rhizome fragments or the roots breaking apart and floating around and forming a new plant, but also the seeds, which this plant creates thousands and thousands of them, are also viable and can produce another plant. So this is definitely a unique management challenge for the district that other organizations do not have to deal with in the state, making our population a little bit harder to stay on top of. But from 27 to 2022, management efforts have seen about a 99% reduction in the total flowering rush abundance by the end of each season. Unfortunately, from 2021 to last year, and potentially this year, which I'll get to in a second, some new challenges have arisen and has made that reduction still very good, 96, 97%, but there has been, at the end of the season, a little bit more remaining. In 2023, the district's flowering rush management schedule looks something like this. The first treatment of the season was on July 26th and occurred at these 4 large area treatments here. A follow-up treatment occurred on August 15th, where they boated around the entire shoreline of the lake and sprayed all these spot locations from their watercraft. Between the August 15th and the August 29th treatment, the district received an unusually high number of calls and emails from concerned lake residents and visitors worried about the flowering rush that was growing on their shore and that it was being missed by the applicator. Not all these locations are easily accessible from the boat, so in order to capture more of this growth that was happening up on shore, the district worked with PLM and lake management to perform backpack spraying. This first treatment on August 29th was a test, so they went out on the west basin of Forest Lake and they walked the entirety of this shoreline with backpack sprayers and sprayed flowering rush as it was found. We had to receive a special permit from the DNR in order to do this, and the results of this indicated that it was possible, it was cost effective, and it was something that PLM and lake management was able to do for us and willing to do. So moving forward, on September 27th, a month later, the final treatment of the season to capture as much of the flowering rush growth as possible, they went out and they walked the entirety of the shoreline with backpack sprayers, all 3 basins around the entire perimeter of the lake, and sprayed flowering rush and marked it as they went. On October 10th, they went back and any locations that couldn't be reached or that was growing out in deep water couldn't be reached with waders and the backpack sprayer, they captured and sprayed with their watercraft. Herbicide treatments are a major component of the district's flying rush management strategy. However, as I mentioned previously, the seed heads of Forest Lake's flying rush population are unique in that they are able to produce viable seed heads. These seeds are able to spread and potentially establish new populations of this plant. So the district has spent a lot of time and energy into clipping as many of these seed heads annually to prevent their spread as possible. In 2023, staff boated and walked the shoreline of Forest Lake and clipped more than 4,000 seed heads. Last year, the district clipped around 2,500 seed heads, and in previous years before that, a couple hundred at most were clipped. The reason that we're seeing such a large increase in the number of seed heads clipped is likely due to the low water levels that the district has been experiencing for the last couple of years. These low water level conditions are very favorable for flying rush and helps it thrive in the near shore area. As the water recedes, it exposes lake sediments closer to the surface, if not to the surface itself. And in these locations are where staff have seen the highest density of seed heads being produced at once. The hope is that once lake levels return to normal, so too will the number of seed heads clipped. However, the district going forward will continue to be very diligent about this and stay on top of them to prevent the spread as much as possible. In addition to a favorable condition, low water levels also have created a navigation challenge for treatment. The boats that they use are having more difficulty getting in between the docks and up on shore. And so this was another driving force for why the district contracted PLM to attempt and test out and then eventually implement the backpack spraying. Another challenge faced for the district's program is that there are fewer larger area treatments and more individual patches. It's much easier to treat in large patches than it is to go out, seek, and find individual plants that are growing up on shore or intermixed with native plants. Again, another reason why the backpack spraying was pursued. The lessons learned from these challenges will make changes that will be implemented for next year. Right from the start, we will be planning to perform shoreline walking with the backpack sprayers again at least once or twice next season. In addition, district staff have already been talking with the applicator about different herbicide choices for plants that are growing up on shore versus what is growing in water. Each require a different mixture of herbicides to achieve the most effective control. And then the timing of events. Timing of treatments and surveys will also be altered based upon the results of this season. That mentioned, unfortunately, at the end of the season, we were not able to squeeze in an assessment survey to get an idea of what the final acreage of the season was. However, given how thorough of a treatment this is, probably the most thorough in the district's history, walking the entire shoreline with a backpack sprayer, district staff are confident that we have reached, if not exceeded, the 99% reduction goal that we had set out and achieved in years past. Next topic will be the Moody Lake Revegetation Project. So the district has been interested in aquatic native plantings for a number of years, but it was only in early 2023 when we had the opportunity to meet with EOR staff and researchers at the University of Minnesota to discuss native plant transplanting projects and research. During those conversations, Moody Lake was brought up and identified as a candidate lake for this project because of its improving water quality through the work that the district has been doing in and around Moody Lake, and also because of the low native plant diversity. Moody Lake historically has been dominated by curlyleaf pondweed. However, as time has gone on and that the water quality has improved, we have also noticed in our point intercept data that curlyleaf pondweed has been slowly reduced and displaced by more and more native plants. But Regardless of this, there seemed to be still just a few number of native plants in the lake in total, so the goal ultimately was to establish new native plants in Moody Lake to improve the water quality, boost biodiversity, and also improve the fishery quality. On August 1st, the district was actually able to go out with one of the researchers from the University of Minnesota and conduct this transplanting project. Plants were collected from Lake Keewatin the day before, stored in coolers, hauled out to Moody Lake, and at the site, clay balls were packed around clumps of native plants and their roots. This helped them sink to the lake bottom and gave them a better chance of establishing themselves. At each planting location, a GPS point was taken so that next year these areas can be referenced and we can see if anything has established and or spread outside of the planting sites. On either side of the planting site is at least one control site. This will be used as part of the University of Minnesota's researchers' study to see if the planting actually was successful, if there are new species that were not observed elsewhere in the lake. To aid the researchers on their broader study of native aquatic plant transplanting projects, the district drafted a report detailing the implementation steps that were taken to get this project ultimately implemented, as well as detailed some of the plant species that were present in the lake prior to implementation, as well as the plant species that were introduced into the lake from Lake Keewatin. In 2024, the plan is to go back out and reassess the lake, doing a meandering survey and focusing in on the planting locations to identify if any of the plant species thrown out into the lake had established themselves. At that time, the district will update this plan and forward it to the researchers so that it may aid them again in their broader study. Next topic will be Moody and Shields Lakes aeration systems. The district has been operating these systems for a number of years with the goal of increasing dissolved oxygen levels to hopefully reduce winter fish kills and support a healthy fishery. In the case of Shields Lake, where we've done carp removals and carp populations assessments, the results of which have indicated that common carp in Shields Lake are just below the threshold at which carp start to negatively impact water clarity and quality. We really want to make sure that we're doing all that we can to support a healthy fishery of native fish that will ultimately predate on the common carp's eggs and juveniles and keep their populations in check. The systems will be reactivated again sometime in early 2024, likely as soon as ice conditions are safe in January. On a couple of the district's smaller water bodies, district staff are able to perform the meandering early detection surveys themselves. One of these lakes includes Little Comfort Lake. The results of the July 18th survey were that no new AIS were found. However, curlyleaf pondweed, Eurasian water milfoil, and purple loosestrife were identified as present again. Thankfully, all three, the majority of their growth was in light densities, and so no management or treatment was recommended at the time. However, the district will continue to monitor these populations for any variability or changes in the future. As mentioned on the previous slide, there are a couple lakes that the district is able to perform early detection meandering surveys on, and Lake Keewatin is the other one. No new AIS were found in the lake, and no curlyleaf pondweed was identified in the lake, which we know is present, but our survey was maybe a little bit later to capture any that was growing. The real focus, though, was delineating purple loosestrife around the perimeter of the lake for a treatment that ultimately occurred on August 23rd. Across 11 different large area treatment locations, 2.6 acres were treated. An assessment survey was conducted on September 19th, and overall the treatment was very effective with little growth remaining. There's a few areas of persistent growth, like location number 9, depicted over here. and 8, where we expect to be performing more treatments going forward. However, a lot of these treatments on the western side of the lake are slowly thinning out, if not being seemingly eradicated. Continuing on the topic of purple loosestrife treatments, a treatment was also performed on Forest Lake this season. District staff went out and delineated 10 areas of heavy purple loosestrife growth, which totaled about 2.8 acres. Treatment was performed on August 29th, and an assessment survey followed a couple weeks later. Overall, just like Keewatin Lake, treatments are very effective if we can get the herbicide on the plant, which PLM and Lake Management has been doing a good job of in past years. And so these areas of persistent growth, which I can highlight in this Basin 1 southern channel, this Basin 3 northern channel, and some of these points over the years of annual treatments for the last few years are starting to thin out, and there has been actually a location down here on Basin 3 where we no longer treat anymore. So the district will plan on treating again next year, but hopefully a few more years of good management should reduce these locations and hopefully not have to treat as much going forward. In 2023, the district conducted an alum treatment in the second basin of Forest Lake. There is some literature to suggest that common carp can impact the longevity of an alum treatment. However, a more widely known and researched topic is just the impact that common carp have on water quality and clarity across the board. And so the district was just in general interested in knowing what the common carp population in Forest Lake was prior to the implementation of this project. That said, the district contracted WSB, who had done work for us in the past on Shields Lake. They visited the lake on 3 separate dates. Each of these visits consisted of 3 20-minute electrofishing attempts. They would boat in shallow areas of Forest Lake, shock for 20 minutes, and net any carp that may have surfaced. Across all the surveys, only 5 carp were captured in total. Using this information, they were able to estimate the carp population in the entire lake, which they put at between 44.4 and 57.4 pounds per acre of carp biomass in the lake. To put this in perspective, the threshold value that scientists have assigned above which common carps negatively start impacting the water body in terms of water quality and clarity is at 89.9 pounds. So Forest Lake falls well below this range. As mentioned previously, the district contracts survey work for specific species such as curlyleaf pondweed and Eurasian water milfoil. In addition to these, the district also contracts survey work to look at all the plant species in a lake at one time. This kind of survey is called a point intercept macrophyte survey, and these are conducted in the district every 5 years on its major lakes. Some lakes, such as Shields, Comfort, and Moody Lakes, have PI surveys performed more frequently, depending on certain permitting and reporting requirements from the DNR, for instance. However, all lakes generally stay on a 5-year rotation. This data helps track changes in the plant community over time, such as in Moody Lake, when developing the native plant transplanting project, we were looking at the point intercept survey data to watch the native plant community change over time in correlation with the water quality. And that is one of the ways that we identified Moody Lake as a potential candidate for that type of treatment. I would encourage anyone who's interested in knowing what is growing in the district's lakes to go to the district's website and page through these reports. Tying into the point intercept native plant survey, the next topic will be the Forest Lake CI biobase survey. In 2022, discussions around planning the 2023 alum treatment were had, and during those meetings, some concerns were brought up about the potential expansion of native plants in that basin. In some lakes that are heavily polluted and eutrophic, post-alum treatment, there can be a massive expansion of native plants. In the case of Forest Lake, however, its water quality was starting at a much better place, so staff do not believe such a noticeable or massive influx of native plants will be observed next year. However, we wanted to do some data tracking, so in 2022, using CI bio-based software, which utilizes depth finder sonar to track the density of plants growing on the bottom, we were able to create a map which can be seen on the right of the screen here. Then in 2023, we went back out in September and recreated this map, which looks very similar to this, and are able now to have a very clear picture of where native plants are growing in the lake. And in 2024, we'll be able to go back out, redo this survey, and see what kind of expansion, if any, post-alum treatment has occurred. Moving on, the next topic will be bone lake zebra mussels. This is a topic I've discussed at many monthly AIS updates and year-end reports. However, for those that are unfamiliar, I can do a very brief background. In 2019, several zebra mussels were found off the end of the public dock. A treatment followed where we shut down the public access for a number of days and treated the water with copper sulfate in an attempt to try to eradicate any zebra mussels that may not have been found during that initial discovery. Since 2019, no zebra mussels have been found in the entire lake, despite countless veliger tows, diving surveys, and wading surveys performed by staff. Unfortunately, on July 20th of 2023, while Blue Water Science was out performing their point intercept survey, they did happen to find a single zebra mussel on a piece of vegetation that they pulled from the lake. This is the first time that zebra mussels have been found in the lake since the initial 2019 discovery. In addition to this, staff also performed a veliger tow this year, went out twice and performed this type of survey and submitted the samples to the DNR's labs, who did in fact confirm the presence of veligers. And for those who might be unfamiliar, veligers are basically the larvae or juvenile zebra mussels that are free floating in the water column, and as they collect calcium and develop a shell, they fall out of the water column and attach to whatever is available. This has triggered just kind of the continuation of long-term population monitoring. For a number of years, we've had volunteers host zebra mussel sampler plates on the lake, and this new discovery is just reinforcing that program. Staff are going out and seeking more volunteers and performing more inspections, and we're just going to try to track the population as best as possible moving forward. All right, and that concludes the AIS program year-end section of the presentation. Again, the report that was based off of can be found on the district's website and included in the December 20th board packet. That report will have more details about many of the AIS program's activities, so I encourage those interested to take a look at that. Additionally, for those interested in more details about the AIS treatments themselves, whether they be curly pondweed, flowering rush, Eurasian water milfoil, and so on, Blue Water Science puts together really detailed and in-depth reports of these treatments and the full history of the district's treatments in those, and those also can be found on the district's website. Next, we'll be moving on to the Watercraft Inspection Program year-end summary. This report, as well as the AIS program that I had just mentioned, can be found on the district's website. Starting this section off, we'll take a look at the district-wide inspection hours and number of inspections per season. This graph shows the district's history with the program beginning in 2014. As I have mentioned in a couple of the previous year's watercraft inspection year-end reports, 2020 was by far the program's busiest year in terms of inspections and inspections per hour rate. And if you look at the state's data and their records across the board, the state was the busiest in 2020 as well for this program. Since 2020, there were some hiring difficulties and staff retention difficulties in 2021 and 2022. So the number of inspections and hours fell slightly. However, in 2023, due to some compensation changes that were implemented the previous year, we had a full crew of inspectors almost from the beginning of the season who operated and had great coverage during the peak of the the summer, which would be June, July, and August. Because of this full crew of inspectors, the district's program in 2023 was able to perform its second highest number of hours, which was 4,002 hours this year, and was just beat out by 2017's 4,036 hours. In terms of inspection numbers, we also were able to perform the third highest, which was beat out by 2020 and 2017, but this year 7,903 inspections in total. By dividing the inspections by the number of hours, we're able to get an inspections per hour rate of 1.97. If we average the last 10 years of the program's inspection rates, we get about 1.87 inspections per hour. The district sets its goal at about 2. This seems to be a realistic number for the program based upon the level of boat traffic to our accesses. And this is just kind of a slightly arbitrary number that the district likes to shoot for. We want to maximize the funding that we do have available to us. That way we're reaching as many boaters as possible. For 2024, we hope some of the changes that had led to a successful year in 2023 continue to prove fruitful, in that we have a full crew of inspectors right from the start again, which will definitely help us reach our goals and exceed them, which we did this year for all of our water bodies, which I will discuss more in later sections of this presentation. Next, we're going to take a look at the district-wide inspections, hours, and inspection rate per week graph. This graph is a little busy. There's a lot going on, a lot of numbers, but I'll break it down slightly. That way it's a little more digestible. In fact, we can mostly focus in on the inspections per hour rate here and the line graph, which also depicts the inspections per hour rate. As I had mentioned on the previous slide, the district had a full team of inspectors this season for most of the busy part of the year. This was largely due to a lot of returning inspectors being onboarded, inspectors who had worked with us the previous year or two or more. I think our lead watercraft inspector, this was his 5th year. So those inspectors were able to be onboarded much quicker than hiring someone new to the program. This allowed us by the 2nd to 3rd week of May to have a really solid team of inspectors performing inspections. And then that meant by Memorial Weekend in May, we were able to have really great coverage for that first holiday weekend. Inspection rates remain relatively high for most of the summer, but did taper off towards the end as the season grew a little bit slower and as watercraft inspectors left for school or other fall obligations. As a tracking tool, the district estimates the number of hours it could work using its budget early in the season, and then we divide that number by the number of weeks we have, and we can roughly get a number of hours per week to reach our goal by the end of the season, which is depicted by this purple bar. And so we really try to have inspectors work and perform such that we are reaching this hour goal. That way we're using up our budget by the end of the season. And as you can see, as I had already mentioned, by the early season, we had a full crew of inspectors, so we were able to reach that hour goal and maintain it until about the second week of September, which is really great. Though the one area that could still use some improvement for the program is just the end of the season, so mid-September, October. This is always the district's and other organizations' slowest part of the year, but also in terms of inspectors, when they typically have the least number of inspectors for their programs. This is largely due to, as I had mentioned previously, inspectors leaving for other fall obligations, which a lot of our seasonal employees are still in school, so they head back to college at this time. We would still like to have slightly more inspections and more hours worked during these last few weeks of the season, because this is a time when inspectors might be encountering new boaters who only come to the access once or twice per year, once to put in their dock, once to take it out, we would still like to have some interactions with those individuals and making sure that they are aware of the current AIS laws and just having positive interactions with them as well. So overall, the year went very well. Again, we are very happy with how many inspections and hours we were able to perform during the peak of the season. But again, looking ahead to next year, we'll be trying to find some ways to retain some staff for the fall months. To maximize the district's limited budget, we want to make sure that we're inspecting as many boats per hour as possible. One way of achieving this is scheduling the bulk of our hours during the peak times of the week, which intuitively makes sense for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. These are undoubtedly the busiest times of the week for our accesses, the weekend when people are off work and wanting to get out on the lake. And so this is where the district puts a lot of its in-house inspectors. For those unaware, we also work with Chisago County and have a joint powers agreement with their watercraft inspection program. And so they hire several watercraft inspectors throughout the season and station them at district accesses Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. This split allows us in-house to focus on the busiest 3 days of the week, and then also have Chisago County provide some coverage during the week when there are definitely still boaters out, fishermen early in the morning. And so we want to make sure that across the week we have good coverage, but we also want to maximize our inspector coverage during the peak times. That way we're maintaining a very high inspection per hour rate and maximizing that budget, as I had talked about. Next, we're going to take a look at the district-wide watercraft contaminants and drain plug violations graph. Very briefly, we can define contaminants as anything such as water remaining in the boat. It could be mud on the anchor. It could be plants hanging from the trailer, or zebra mussels or other types of animals attached to the hull of the boat. The other violation on this graph are drain plugs upon arrival. If a boat arrives at a public access with the drain plug in, a watercraft inspector would ask them to pull forward somewhere away from the public access, remove the drain plug, empty any water that might be remaining, and then they would be able to come back around and be able to launch their watercraft in that water body. With that out of the way, we can take a look at some of the graph data here. In 2023, we had 67 contaminants found entering the lakes. Overall, this is pretty average for the district. I think this is an AIS law that most people are aware of now. They know that their boats need to be clean and free of any contaminants, and most people do a very good job at making sure that the watercrafts are clean. However, there are always a few, and I would say that this year with 67 violations, that this is pretty average. This is about on par with the last couple of years, and prior to 2020 for a few years, we were seeing over 140 violations. So overall, I would say that this number is average or fairly low, which has been great. However, watercraft inspectors did still capture these violations and made sure that they were up to code before they were allowed entry into any of our lakes. The other violation on this graph are drain plugs upon arrival. This year we had 68 violations. This unfortunately was up from the last couple of years. But again, I'd say if you were to average out the last 9 or 10 years of data, that this would actually be pretty average as well. The last data point on here is contaminants found exiting our lakes. This year we had 1,275 violations. This is always high. On these violation graphs, we always have a lot of contaminants found exiting the lake. That's because as a boat pulls out, the inspector sees the trailer before it has any chance of being cleaned, and they mark it as a violation. On some of our accesses, depending on where they are on the lake and which way the prevailing winds are blowing, there can be large bogs of floating plant debris that are impossible not to have attached to your boat and trailer as they're pulled out. And so all these boats are cleaned and decontaminated before they are allowed to be transported. Our inspectors do a very good job of offering help and helping them get a lot of that material off. And if they do decide to leave without fully decontaminating their watercrafts, they would be subject to citations or tickets if they were to be pulled over. But for the most part, most individuals are pretty good at making sure that their watercrafts are clean before leaving an access. To combat this, the last couple of years, the district has been stationing rakes out at the public accesses, locking them up on a tree, hiding them kind of off to the side, and watercraft inspectors are asked to use their downtime to rake any floating debris that might be piling up at the public access. While they do the best that they can, as I mentioned, some of these accesses just have so much floating debris that it's almost impossible to keep up with. However, we still ask that our watercraft inspectors do the best that they can just to try to reduce this number. This was up quite a bit from the last couple of years, and that is likely due to the low water levels that were experienced this year. Some of our accesses were extremely shallow, and the floating vegetation that would start to pile up and become almost an impenetrable bog that unfortunately found its way on a lot of boats and trailers. But again, a lot of those boats and trailers, if not all, were cleaned and decontaminated before they were allowed to leave. Next, this is a graph I always like to create and include in our presentation and the watercraft inspection year-end report. I think it shows that the district is not only interested in preventing the introduction of new AIS into our water bodies, but we're also interested in preventing the spread of AIS species that are present in our lakes to other area lakes that don't have them, such as Eurasian water milfoil, zebra mussels, and flowering rush. And so we can use the DNR's inspection data and the responses from visitors to see where they intend to visit next. And from their responses, I'm able to create a ranking of the top 10 responses. And in order, we have individuals from district lakes saying that they intend to visit Big Marine next, the St. Croix River, White Bear, Coon, Minnetonka, Sago, Mille Lacs, Bald Eagle, Clear, and Green Lake. And from here, I have listed which lakes are infested with what. And as you can see, like Big Marine is our #1 response. They do not have zebra mussels. And so we have a lot of boats that are leaving Forest Lake with zebra mussels going to Big Marine. And this is a big reason of why exiting inspections are just as important as our incoming inspections. Next, we're going to take a look at the graph for Bone Lake inspections and hours worked. So this is the full history on Bone Lake of the number of hours, inspections, and inspection rates for each of the years. Looking at 2023, early in the season, we had projected, based upon available funding and what we expected to receive, that on Bone Lake we could fund up to 600 hours of inspections. And what we actually ended up doing was 714, actually just over that. So we far exceeded our hour goal for this access, and the main driver behind that was just having that full crew of inspectors early on in the season, providing great coverage throughout the peak of the summer. And during those 714 hours, we performed 866 inspection surveys, which is our second highest number of inspections for a season just outside of 2020, which again, as I mentioned earlier, was a very unusual and very busy year. So I'd be quite surprised if we ever are able to quite reach those numbers again in a given season. So overall, this year was very busy, but a good one in terms of providing excellent coverage and reaching a lot of different boaters and making sure that their boats and water equipment were clean before entering and leaving this access. Just like Bone Lake, we have a similar graph for Forest Lake inspections and hours worked. To keep it brief, we can just hone in on 2023. So at the beginning of the season, we estimated that we could probably achieve more than 2,000 hours of inspection hours. And at the end of the season, we actually were able to work 2,570. This seems to be on par with a lot of the previous years, and to exceed this number is fairly difficult. We did it twice before, once in 2020 and another time in 2017. However, this gets to be about the point where we're having as many inspections as we can cram in on Forest Lake on the weekends as possible. Saturday or Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, almost always is there an inspector at the three accesses providing some level of coverage. So we are very happy with how many hours we were able to put in on Forest Lake. During that time, inspectors performed 6,056 inspections, which resulted in a 2.36 inspection rate, which is actually quite high and is up there as one of our better inspection years in terms of inspections per hour. This actually ranked our third best in terms of overall inspections. So this year, again, due to that great coverage, 8 inspectors during the peak of the season, we were able to provide amazing coverage, especially on the Forest West axis, which is our busiest, followed by the East axis, and then whatever remaining inspectors we have, we filled on that middle basin axis, which is the slower of the three, but across the board, very, very good coverage for this water body. Lastly, we have the Comfort Lake inspections and hours worked graph. I might sound a bit like a broken record on this one just because it's a similar story as the other two lakes, but at the beginning of the season, we calculated the hour goals for this lake at more than 600 inspection hours, and at the end of the season, we were actually able to achieve just over 718 hours. In that time, we performed 981 watercraft inspections, which resulted in an inspection per hour rate of 1.37. In terms of hours worked, this was actually the district's busiest year on Comfort Lake, providing a substantial increase over other years in terms of hours and just our overall presence at this access. And we actually ended up performing the second highest number of inspection surveys at that access, only beat out by 2022, which, as I have mentioned in the past, was a very unusual and busy year. So overall, Comfort Lake had amazing coverage, some of the best coverage in the district's history, and we were able to reach and interact with a lot of different boaters this season, which we're very happy about. And to wrap everything up, the AIS program and watercraft inspection programs were extremely successful in reaching the goals that they set out early in the year. We adaptively managed AIS across the board and implemented some changes based upon the input and feedback from experts, lake residents, and lake associations, specifically with the flowering rush management, where we incorporated shoreline walking and backpack spraying. We adjusted the timing of treatments, and now we're discussing some herbicide choices for next season, where we'll be using different types of formulations based upon if the flowering rush is growing on land versus the water. That way we're making sure that each treatment is as effective as possible. As for the watercraft inspection program, a lot of the success could be chalked up to some of the changes that we have implemented last year in terms of compensation. We really wanted to encourage inspectors to think about returning next season, and so we made some incentives for that. And in fact, this year we had more than half of our inspectors return from previous years, which is great because they bring a level of expertise that can only be attained through years of doing the work, and so they're bringing a high level of quality to their inspections and their work overall. During the off season, we'll be having some meetings with the DNR and organizations across the state to discuss some successes and failures of different aspects of their watercraft inspection programs, ours included, and we'll be looking to make some changes for next year and see where we can improve our processes. Plans for 2024, both for the AIS and watercraft inspection program, will be documented in a plan that will be typically released in March. It's an annual plan just detailing some of the AIS management activities and some of the goals for the watercraft inspection program that we put out every year, and that again, that's typically in a board packet in March. If there was any information in today's presentation that I didn't cover, I wanted to keep this under an hour. I would encourage folks to take a look at the AIS year-end and watercraft inspection year-end reports, which this presentation were based on. I wanted to just kind of give a general overview in this presentation, call out some of the highlights and discuss some things. But obviously there's a lot that was going on with both these programs. So for a little more detail, I would refer to you or refer those documents to you. In addition, I had mentioned in the past that Blue Water Science also drafts reports on each of the AIS species that we manage, so you can get a full history of the district's involvement with those management activities and some of the outcomes of those treatments for this year and previous years. If you have questions for me directly, I will leave my contact information up here on the screen. You can either call my office phone or email me directly. I'm always happy to take questions if you have any. And with that, I would just like to thank everyone for their continued support of these programs. The support and the feedback has only made this program better each year. We had a really great 2023, and I expect 2024 to be great as well, if not even better. So thank you all, and have a great day. Thanks.